Okay, we're live in three, two, one.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome you from East Coast, West Coast, wherever you're coming in from. I know we have some international visitors once in a while as well. But my name's Alan Jess, and I'll be your host today. And this is our Tuesday Universal Peace Federation webinar series. And this we're sponsored today by the International Association for Peace and Economic Development. We're one of the 8 associations under the UPF USA umbrella. And for the sake of our new guests who may be joining us, the Universal Peace Federation was co-founded in 2005, 20 years ago, by the late Reverend Sum Moon and his wife, Dr. Hak Jahan Moon. And it is a 501c3 NGO with general consultative status with United Nations Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC. So we're proud of that. We are an international and interreligious network of individuals and organizations, including representatives from religion, government, civil society, and the private sector, dedicated to achieving world peace. That's right, that's our goal. On the foundation of mutual prosperity, interdependence, and universally shared values. It is possible and it's time. I think we all agree. So, this program today is live streamed and recorded up on our website, us.upf.org. If you have questions for our two speakers today, you can put them in the chat field and we'll do our best to answer them or pull out a few. So today's program topic is the dollars and cents of human trafficking and exploitation. And from the economic perspective, in its simplest form, economics is about producing supplies to meet the demands of consumers. And so this industry of pornography, sex trafficking, child and sexual abuse, and human exploitation of all kinds is a multi-trillion-dollar business driven in part by criminal rings and corporations of all sizes, many of which are household names. So how can society reduce the demand for commercialized sex that destroys individuals, families, and communities? How can we reduce the demand? And what can be done to cripple or hold accountable to the criminal groups and the producers of all these the garbage that floods the internet and business and cripples some of these predatory businesses? So it is an admittedly difficult topic, but I'm very enthusiastic about today's speakers and their work to bring about awareness and hopeful solutions. So with that short intro, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Patrick Erlandson. And Mr. Erlandson is the founder and executive director of FatherCon and the See It, End It Film and Arts Festival. Patrick was born in Los Angeles, the second of seven children, and he has said his greatest education, I love this, his greatest education came through hitchhiking across the United States and Canada and discovering the beauty of God's creation and also the generosity of people. That's wonderful. He was blessed in marriage to his Japanese wife, Machiko, in 1982, and they lived in Japan from 1992 and 2000, where he traded one career as an art gallery director to become an English teacher. Returning to the United States, he continues to teach reading to students from Japan and Korea as a private tutor. But in 2010, at the height of the Arab Spring displacement of millions, Mr. Erlandson took a job for 2 years with the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, during which he first learned of the trafficking of organs of children in Egypt, which became a turning point in his life. He began to research all aspects of human trafficking and exploitation of vulnerable people, leading him to create a one-stop website for all events in Southern California related to human trafficking. And then he founded in 2019 both the See It, End It Film and Arts Festival for Human Trafficking Awareness and Prevention and FatherCon. FatherCon, that's Father-Con, is a ministry to encounter the lives that are leaving hundreds of thousands of children threatened by such evils as sextortion, trafficking, and AI-generated sexual abuse, as well as the gender confusion and depression that are the result of cultural and political attacks on faith and family. It has become a ministry to build faithful families with fathers who are intentional and present in the lives of their children. That's Patrick's ministry. Father Khan has held 5 conferences providing expert workshops and trainings, including pornography, fentanyl poisoning, cybersecurity, or cyber safety rather, faith and fatherhood, human trafficking, legal issues of custody and co-parenting, and more. And Mr. Erlandson now presents, teaches, and trains at churches and classrooms in California and as far away as Vienna, Austria, where he spoke to the plenary session of world delegates at the 32nd Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice under the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. So, Patrick, welcome to our program. We're really looking forward to hearing your story and your thoughts on this issue. So, the floor is yours.
That was really quite a mouthful. I'm really honored to be here. I'm really grateful to be able to share with your audience. And it is such a can of worms and such a huge topic. And so I'm really grateful that Tim is here as well. I think Nikosi's done and just amazing work of drawing attention to this issue and taking on the kind of the legislative side. Whereas I've really chosen to focus on prevention. And I think that's, to me, I worked with the Long Beach Human Trafficking Task Force here in Los Angeles, and we had one organization was Men Standing Against Trafficking, which I held the kind of leadership of, and it was a way to introduce men to the topic. I think when I started working on the human trafficking with the task force, there was almost no men involved. It was 98% women driven, and yet so much of the problem is caused by men. And so we wanted to find a way to introduce men to the issue and to get them to, get their feet wet, so to speak, and engage them in seeing their responsibility to helping bring an end to human trafficking and exploitation of vulnerable people. So we had Men Standing Against Trafficking, and I never forget, we used to meet once a month on a street corner where a girl had been killed by her trafficker outside of a hotel. And it's an area that's just many people that are being trafficked are on this street. And early in the morning when kids are walking on their way to school, we heard so many stories from the neighbors of what they went through. But one story really stood out for me. I was standing there with a group of men, and we had signs, and this woman pulled into the parking lot, and she screeched to a halt, got out of her car, walked right up to me, stood in front of my face, and said, "Thank you." And I took a step back and said, "You're welcome." And then she proceeded to tell me that 5 years before, she was being sold on that street corner where we were. And her last customer, after he had finished his business, pulled out a knife and stabbed her 5 times and pushed her out of the car into the gutter. She was fortunate that she survived. And because she was in the hospital so long, her trafficker gave up on her. But it was experiences like that that just kind of like tore my heart. And you realize each person has so much to contribute to our world. And with every single person who has their identity changed by a trafficker, by a situation where they're being forced to see themselves as having no greater value than what they can bring in financially to their trafficker and how they can perform with the customer. It just really shattered my heart. And so I started working more and more with survivors and hearing their stories, and it was almost became universal. It's like almost every person who got trafficked had a father issue, and that's what led to kind of looking at, going upstream. Why do we have this spigot wide open of children who are vulnerable to kind of the enticements, the lies, the deception of traffickers, who are increasingly grooming children online? So that led me to kind of really looking at fatherhood and what we've done to our role as fathers and what kind of things fathers believe about their significance and their position in the family. And there's been just a tremendous breakdown. Since we've had no-fault divorce, we've seen just a rise in the ability to just walk away from children, to walk away from families. All of these things have led to a vulnerability in children. There's some incredible studies that were done that I love to cite. One was on human empathy, and it showed that children learn empathy more from the engagement with a father than any other source. And to me, when I first heard that, it was so counterintuitive. You just think, of course you're learning empathy from the mother, just seems like the rational conclusion. But according to the study, it was very interesting. They said the way that fathers play with their children, the way that they interact with their kids, um, fathers will allow things to push to a certain limit. They'll allow someone to get hurt, whereas mothers tend to bring out the bubble wrap. But in allowing children to go to a point where someone's going to get hurt or someone's going to be made to feel uncomfortable, the father will then turn off the play. And then at that point, the child has to learn, oh, I have to be aware of the feelings of other people. And so it's very fascinating. But if the development of empathy comes from an engagement with a father, especially in the way that fathers play and the way that they interact with children, that explains a lot when we look at the incarceration rates of young people that are finding themselves either in gangs or in criminal behavior. If we don't develop empathy, it's much easier for us to commit crime, and it's much easier for us to cross kind of barriers and like social norms, legal bounds, moral bounds. And I think a lot of that comes from also our culture, which is massively emphasizing a sense of entitlement. To me, this is really the more I looked, upstream at what were the attitudes, what were the what are the things happening psychologically that's enabling so many people to become traffickers, to become buyers, and to be victimized. And I think when we look at our culture today, there's such a strong sense of entitlement that my life should be better. I should have more pleasure. I should be feeling happy all the time. I shouldn't be restricted or limited in what I'm allowed to do with my life, with my body. But this growing sense of entitlement, and it comes from advertising. All day long, you're being told what you deserve. All day long, you're being shown things that you should want that's gonna make your life better. Politicians are constantly promising things that you're entitled to. It's the messaging that's all around us. The problem with entitlement is the more you focus on what you're entitled to, what you deserve, things that you don't have, that means that you're a victim. It creates this victim mindset of I should have these things and I don't. And so something is wrong here. I'm being deprived of the things that I'm supposed to have, that I deserve. And so then that creates a justification. It's okay for me to go out and pay for a 12-year-old because I'm supposed to have this kind of experience. I'm supposed to have this kind of enjoyment in my life. So it fuels the willingness to cross moral and legal lines. And I think, especially when you consider the impact of pornography, which I think pornography fuels a sense of entitlement more than anything else in our culture and our society today. It's constantly stimulating you with unrealistic, this illusion of pleasure that somehow we are supposed to buy into and feel that this is what our lives are supposed to be like, and that this is going to somehow make me happier as a human being. And it just doesn't. And so I think, these are things that we need to counter. And one of the areas when you start looking at family structure, I mean, the data is so clear that having a mother and a father dynamic decreases the amount of poverty. It's something like 5%. You're 5 times more likely to live in poverty with a single mother, a single parent than you are with a two-parent home. So all of those things then contribute. You're increasing poverty. You're increasing the poor education. The violence rates of children growing up without a father is really increasing, and leads to a lot of the incarceration rates. And these days now you have teachers just stopping teaching because the classroom environment is so violent. But all of these things lead to kind of a mindset that increases both the demand and the supply of human trafficking. If a girl has not experienced being loved, if she hasn't seen love in her parents, then she's much more receptive to the promises of a trafficker. And as traffickers increasingly have access to almost every child who's online, that becomes a much broader net to bring in people into exploitation than we've ever seen before. The number of children who can be approached 24/7 by predators, by traffickers, by sextortionists, is off the scale now. but also the demand side. If you're stimulating a sense of entitlement and feel that you should be having this kind of experience, you're going to go out and, if you know that there's access to human bodies. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a survivor who said that, guys would pull out a phone and go, "This is what I want to do to you," and something that they've seen in pornography. So it's stimulating an appetite that can't be met by a girlfriend or a wife or a girlfriend. So I think this is where you end up with men who are willing to cross certain boundaries. The other thing that really concerned me before I went to go speak in Vienna a couple of years ago, I stopped off in Amsterdam, and I toured the red light district with a police officer who was over the red light district for 15 years. And it was very concerning because you could see the effect of legalization or decriminalization of prostitution on the demand. Once you say that it's okay, this is acceptable behavior. Once it's given the nod legally, you end up with a much greater increase in men who are willing to purchase sex. And I think it's in Germany, the brothels in Germany where it's legal have 1.3 million men a day going to brothels. So once you've legalized, once you've decriminalized, you stimulate the demand. And then once we have this cultural environment that says you're entitled to more than you have, more than you've earned, that you deserve greater pleasure, then you have this kind of very toxic combination of events that lead to a greater sense of exploitation. I mean, the other things are the amounts of money. We're talking about dollars and cents, and I think in one sense trafficking makes sense if this is just a materialistic world. If this is just a world, it's dog eat dog, and it's like, how do I get ahead? It makes a certain amount of sense. And I've talked to former traffickers, and to them, it's like they didn't have a dad. They didn't have any kind of role model of self-control, of integrity. Everything was, if you can get away with it, go for it. And these were their role models. And so then they pursued a career of, in human trafficking. And so many of them ended up in prison. And the cost of failing our families and resulting in the criminal behavior of human trafficking, of sextortion, all of those things is exorbitant. I mean, just the amounts of money, the billions of dollars that's being spent on incarceration of children who are growing up because they didn't have this kind of stable home life, a stable family. So for me, one of the solutions, if we know that a two-parent model, if this is the model that actually works, it creates the greatest environment for children to thrive in. Of course, that doesn't mean abusive parents. It doesn't mean all of the things that we can find fault with in a mother-father home. But if that's the model that creates the greatest amount of stability, it's like only two-parent homes, only 8% of the people are living in poverty that are coming from a two-parent home. It's 47% for single parents, and especially for single mothers. The rate of poverty is much, much higher. And yet our laws and so many of the actions that we've taken have been to support single motherhood with very little attention being paid to how do we support like fathers staying in the family and not creating the conditions that are causing so many problems with our children. So this is where I felt like Father Khan really is kind of the result of looking at how men are being lied to, how we're being conned into believing that we're going to be happier by having multiple sex partners. We're going to be happier by indulging our whims and our appetites than in a committed relationship with our spouse and really loving our children and having them love us back, which I find that's the source of the greatest happiness in human beings, and especially for men. When you look at the Harvard has conducted the longest study of human happiness and adult development over 80 years. And their conclusion was the greatest source of happiness for human beings is found in our long-term relationships. in our family and in these and long-term friendships. If that's the source of our greatest happiness, irregardless of social status, wealth, race, it's not acquisitions. It's not the things that we can buy. It's really in our relationships that we find the greatest human happiness and enduring human happiness. Then that should be our focus. We should be looking at how do we increase the conditions that enable us to create stable homes, healthy home environments, so that children are less likely to be kind of to respond to the appeals of a trafficker or someone that's trying to extort them in some way. Sextortion is a growing problem. Maybe Tim will talk about that a little bit. There's so many threats now to our children who are online so much of the day. I forget, some of the figures were like that a child spends something like an hour a week with their father, and they spend 40 hours online. So we're setting our children up for a much greater danger, and the opportunities for them to meet someone who wants to do them ill is much greater with their online presence as it is today. Yeah, I think so. To me, the solution to our problem is if the two parent family is the model that creates the greatest safety, the greatest thriving for children, then that's what we should be investing our resources in. Our laws should be supporting and the structure of the family much more than incentivizing single motherhood, incentivizing a breakdown of the family. There's just so many of the problems relate to this, and human trafficking is one that very much is driven by and fueled by what's happening within the family. As we break down, as we create laws that actually disrupt the relationship, the respect between children and parents, we cause more problems, not fewer. And so I'm hoping that as we increase the education about the significance of fatherhood, as we elevate our understanding of the significant role of fatherhood, that we'll see legislation, we'll see a lot of things that will provide more support for fathers to stay in the home than to make it easier for them to leave and easier to get a divorce and disengage from your children. You can see like one of the power of a father's his presence with a boy especially is modeling integrity. I think we've lost so much. We've lost an emphasis in education of integrity in our schools and in our culture and our movies, where I learned to control myself, especially as a teenage boy. I learned to control myself, not follow whatever impulse comes along or the influence of peers, but I learned to control myself and gain dominance over my body, where the things that I understand to be true and valuable and like strengthen me to be able to control my physical behavior. And if you have a father that's modeling that and encouraging and raising their children to think that way, we get through the teenage years and you're a better prepared human being to become a parent, which I think is really, so important for us today as we see kind of population decline in so many things. Anyway, I want to encourage everyone, like just really that we take our parenting seriously. The one thing that I'll say in closing is one meeting I had with a survivor, and that she had met this guy online. Her parents had divorced, and she met a guy online, and he led her into hell. Like her experience was just vile, being exploited and trafficked. And I talked to her and I said, like, what would have prevented you from being trafficked? What would have prevented you from listening to him and believing what this person told you? And she just said without hesitation, she said, I wanted to see my dad love my mom. And if she had grown up, if she had seen that, how much more sense the world would have made. And it would have changed the way that she felt about herself and the way she saw herself as a sexual human being. But those words always stuck with me, and it fuels so much of what I do now, which is really how do we elevate the significance, understanding of fatherhood, and how do we make it something that we're inspired about and aspire to as men, because that is where our greatest sense of happiness and joy is going to come from ultimately. And how do we get the resources to people? How do we equip men to be better more committed husbands and fathers, so that we stop producing vulnerable children and boys who become buyers and traffickers. Anyway, thank you so much.
Well, Patrick, thank you. That was beautiful. I heard you preaching there a little bit.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think you've probably done some speaking at churches and religious organizations, right? Maybe you might tell us a little bit about that if you have a few stories. But one thing that came to mind is, if you were to go out and just preach or talk with passion about fatherhood, maybe you'd get an audience, but you might get an audience of people, like-minded people. But if you use the horrible stories of trafficking and real life examples, which then use that to really speak to people, because they're interested and they're shocked by what they hear, and then you turn that into the lesson about fatherhood. I think that's really a powerful way to approach it.
Yeah. Well, and that is you can, as a person of faith, I really believe that God designed us for a certain reality, and that reality would allow us to live at our optimum, our absolute best. We would, like within the design of God, we're going to be the most happy. But I think the more increasingly we look at science and look at psychology, and it's pointing to the same direction. It's like we are so designed for relationships. We're so designed for healthy relationships, and it's a corruption of those. It's a corruption of our nature that allows all of these things to happen. For example, curiosity. I just find, we are with a sense of curiosity about life, and when you consider that the universe is still
Someone could
be muted.
Mute that person who's speaking. Thank you. Thank you. Have you gone to found the religious community, churches and groups receptive? Have you been speaking to some of those groups to build a common base and people's interest?
Have I? Yeah, I speak in churches a lot. I speak to a lot of secular groups. To me, it doesn't matter. If it's a religious group, I really love to use the story of the Garden of Eden. And what is the temptation? The temptation was God says you can eat from all of these trees, but not from this one. And then was that meant to restrict us and limit us as human beings? Was that a punishment? Was that some kind of God being mean, or was he actually inviting us into having a sense of responsibility and entrusting us? He was giving us a chance to trust him and to trust, the design of things more than our appetite for whatever we're being enticed by. And then Lucifer's temptation, in the biblical story, Lucifer's temptation is, what? God tells you can't have it? It looks good. Go take it. God's just trying to keep you down, but go help yourself, and you're going to be happier. You're going to be more like God. So the temptation is one of entitlement. Again, it goes back to this point, like, it wasn't given to me, but I like it. It looks good, and so I'm going to go take it. And so whether that's an apple or a 12-year-old in the backseat of your car, it's that same dynamic that's happening. And and the same thing happens in psychology. We can understand it just from psychology, whether it's in a religious context or in a secular context. Same thing. We're designed for a certain reality. And if we stay within that design, we're going to be the most free and the most successful and the happiest. And it's going outside of our design that causes trauma. We're traumatized by living in an environment that we're not really designed to live in. And this is the thing that's sad for me. A child is not designed to live in an environment where he's going to be abused or lied to by his parents. That's just, our brains are not equipped to handle that kind of environment. And yet we're forcing children into that type of environment that they're not equipped to handle. And
all right. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to bring up our next speaker to share with us, and he's welcome to comment a little bit and share some of his own experience here. But this is Mr. Tim Nestor, and he is the Senior Director with the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, called NICOSE. I think that's how you pronounce it. But as a Senior Director, Tim leads the efforts to spread the word about the movement to end sexual exploitation and using various content and marketing strategies across the website, email, and social platforms. He's responsible for ensuring that the voice of the organization reaches users and inspires them to take action. So Tim received his bachelor's degree from Cedarville University, has been working in marketing and communications for 12 years. Tim and his wife, Katie, have been married for over 20 years. They live in Colorado with their 7 kids. That's a nice handful, including 3 from international and foster care adoption. So Tim, welcome to the program. Please share with us anything that's you'd like to add to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Alan and Patrick. Thank you for sharing. I will say a lot of what you shared, as a dad, hearing you say this, I was on mute, but you would have heard me if you were in the room going, yes, like so true, so accurate. And I'll tell you, my wife and I, we spent 5 years in the Colorado Springs foster care system, bringing kids into our home. Our kids did a great job of welcoming them in, and 2 of them we ended up adopting out of that system. But we saw firsthand these families, and some of the ones you were talking about, Patrick, you were describing these exact scenarios that we saw firsthand lived out. These kids are essentially being forced down this pathway of exploiting themselves in some way, shape, or form, be it through addiction, be it through getting into the sex trade industry in some way, shape, or form. It's heartbreaking. It really is heartbreaking. So I appreciate you sharing it because it does hit home for me personally as well. And that's honestly what drives me in this work. I work for the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, which is based out of Washington, D.C. Really proud of our team. We're a small team. We do really big work. And so I'm really proud of the team. We for short, we call ourselves NCOSI. So if you hear me say that, I'm referring to our organization. And we exist because we know that people should be free to live in love without sexual abuse and exploitation, because every human deserves an opportunity to live life to its fullest potential. And so we do this by exposing the links between all the forms of sexual abuse and exploitation. It's not just 1 or 2. There's so many different factors that play in throughout our culture, throughout corporations, throughout the halls of Congress, and in the courtrooms. And so that's why we pursue these things at mass scale. Patrick, you mentioned this as well. The work that Nkosi does is really at this mass scale level. And so there's 3 main pillars that we tackle. The first one is legislation. So that's one of the reasons we're in Washington, D.C., so we can be right there where the decisions are being made. And the other one is in litigation. So across the country, really around the world, in different courtroom settings, fighting for those who really don't have the capacity or the resources to fight for themselves, these survivors. And then in corporate advocacy, because we know a lot of the power also is in boardrooms at the top of these giant buildings, of these headquarters for these companies. So with those 3 pillars, we oftentimes are doing similar but separated work as we are pursuing these different ways of preventing exploitation at mass scale. But what I wanted to share with you is one issue that really combines all 3 into one spot, where our litigation, our legislation, and corporate advocacy work have all come together to fight against Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which is something that I was not familiar with until a couple years ago. As I started digging more and more into the work here at Nkosi, I started to learn that, hey, it seems like every time we talk about a corporation getting away with something, or a law that's being misinterpreted or misread, or a court case that was thrown out again and the survivor did not get justice, and we started to notice one common theme in that Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. So if you're not familiar with what it is, I'll just give you a quick overview because I know it's helpful for me to hear this sometime as well. And you know what I'll do? I'll actually throw a link. We have a page on our website that I think is super helpful and just gives an overview of it, a history of it, and hopefully it would be helpful for you as well. So I'll throw this in the chat if you'd like to look at it while I'm talking. But Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is often referred to as the 26 words that shaped the internet. And I'll read the exact clause to you so you know which words we're talking about. These are probably some of the most powerful 26 words we've seen in the last few decades, just in terms of the impact they've had. And it reads like this: no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. Sounds like a word pretzel a little bit. Ultimately, what it's doing, it was originally part of the CDA Act that was passed in 1996. And the goal of it the title even of this section was to protect protection for good Samaritan blocking and screening of offensive material. It was truly meant to protect people on the internet and kids, especially on the internet, but also provide some protection for any liability for those who are building these platforms. They wanted the industry to grow without fear of constant lawsuits, and they wanted to protect people online. So they had this little clause to try to get, it was a good faith clause, honestly, that's how it was drafted, that these tech companies would do their part in protecting their users. Well, the problem is the next year, all of CDA was thrown out except for this section. So the Communications Decency Act doesn't even exist anymore, but this section does. And so over 25 years later, here we are, and it has become a pretty major shield for big tech corporations. Even if they are blatantly used to facilitate these egregious acts of sexual exploitation, of sextortion in many cases, of distributing of child sexual abuse material, of image-based sexual abuse, all these horrible things that are happening, whether companies are aware of them right away or not, ultimately they have no incentive to prevent or respond in a timely manner. So the idea behind CDA 230 may have been positive at the start, but as soon as it started to be used in court case after court case after court case to shield big tech and to not give any justice to survivors whose lives had been turned upside down and in many cases ended as a result of this, we know now it's time. It's long past time for something to be done about CDA 230. And so at the end as well, if there's time, I'm happy to address some of the common pushbacks and opposition to CDA 230 and why it's important. It's pretty easy to answer most of those questions, but hopefully I can give you a summary of some of those if you have any of those questions at the end. But what I wanted to do is give you that little background to CDA 230 and then share with you a major campaign we just launched last month. We do this campaign every year. It's called the Dirty Dozen List, and let me share my screen with you and show you last year's page. So for about 12 years, we've been running this program called Dirty Dozen List, and the idea behind it is that we are calling out 12 mainstream facilitators or entities that are enabling, sometimes even profiting from sexual abuse and exploitation. And usually the list is comprised of 12 companies that most of you would totally recognize. So I'll bring up last year's list just for a little bit of context, and hopefully you can see this. If someone on screen can give me a little thumbs up if you can see that, okay. All right, I see some thumbs up, good. So here was the 2024 list as an example. And right away, I'm imagining that you've recognized some, if not all, of these logos. Everyone from Meta, who owns Facebook and Instagram, to Spotify, Roblox, a super popular gaming platform that kids love to use, Discord, again, another gaming-centric platform that people have used for way beyond just chatting with friends while you game together. It's become something where people use to connect with complete anonymity and really no way of being monitored at all. Cash App, popular way to pay money, but it's being used for some pretty egregious things. And then Microsoft's GitHub is an interesting one too. That's a place where people use it as a place to swap code as they're developing programs. And it's been used to develop some pretty horrific programs as well. Actually, there's a victory related to that one. So it's been quite a ride over the years. We have seen time and time again, some companies ignore us and keep on going, but many respond, like Apple, for example. Apple and even LinkedIn, who's on this list, they immediately removed all advertising and in Apple's case, listings for what's called nudifying apps. These apps that would use AI to take an image of anyone you upload and create a pornography version of that person, regardless of age, regardless of whether or not it's you. These nudifying apps are being advertised on places like LinkedIn and being distributed via the App Store. And they were sometimes even rated as low as 4 years old. So my 5-year-old who's in kindergarten, if I give them our iPad, which is locked down, can't download anything unless it's good for kids, the App Store would have let her download some of these apps. So that's the kind of thing that was happening as recently as this past year. Thankfully, Apple made some moves there. LinkedIn made some good improvements. Meta, even, we got to give them credit where credit's due. They made some good changes to Instagram last year. So we've seen some positive things happen, right? We've seen some good momentum. But ultimately, what we realized, we had to go back to that core thing. What is keeping so many companies from being incentivized? Like, I'm still upset that Roblox has done virtually nothing. And in some cases, even their leadership has come out and said, I guess just play something else if you think it's not safe for your kids. Like, it's so tone deaf and I think thoughtless and really inhumane to treat your customers and ultimately kids this way. So we decided let's take a step back. And you can see on this list here, this little section 230, that was on the list last year as a major enabler of sexual exploitation. But this year we pivoted and we decided this entire Dirty Dozen list for 2025 is about Communications Decency Act Section 230. It's time to repeal or reform, honestly, just end Section 230 as it currently stands. If that requires some kind of major reform and it still exists in some format, but it protects people, I think we'd all be open to that conversation, but in my mind, I just want it to go away. And so that's why this year we launched our Dirty Dozen list around this idea of Section 230. And if you go to dirtydozenlist.org, you can see all of this. You can watch some of the videos. We had a great launch event. Really proud of our team for the launch event that we were able to put on. And you can learn more about what CDA is. You can take action, contact your legislator to tell them it's time to put an end to 230 and start getting as soon as they start hearing from their constituents, they start to move. So there's a great action you can take, very easy. And then you can scroll down if you want, and I won't do them here. They are pretty heavy and hard to listen to and watch, but if on your own time you'd like to go and read 12, this is just, by the way, a small selection, 12 of the many stories of survivors who have been silenced and not received justice because of 230. You can come to dirtydozenlist.org and read more about those stories. In many cases, actually in most cases, it's going to be a minor who is put in a completely unsafe situation and then coerced, threatened, tricked, or in some cases even like violently forced into being exploited in some way, shape, or form. And it's sad, and sometimes we don't want to face these things, but it's happening, and we need to stop it, and we need to go to the source. And in our minds, Communications Decency Act Section 230 is a major source, not the only, but is a major source of what is happening in the world of sexual exploitation. So I wanted to share that with you because it's an easy thing for us to see something that's in legislation. CDA Section 230, if you were to say that to me 5 years ago, I probably would have tuned you out and focused on other things because it just sounds complicated. But think of it instead as, hey, let's remove the shield that allows big tech to do whatever they want. Because ultimately, we want them to start prioritizing people over profits. That's what we're calling out these companies to do. Prioritize people over profits. And the reason this is so heartbreaking to me, especially as a dad, is how preventable it is. It's so preventable. So let's remove the law that allows this to happen. Let's address all the concerns around First Amendment, which, by the way, the First Amendment will still exist. We don't get free speech from Section 230. So anyone who's scared about your First Amendment rights, they're still there. We're not asking for a repeal of the First Amendment. Before 1996, I think you had freedom of speech. And so after CDA 230 goes away, you'll still have freedom of speech. And so I think a lot of these arguments are usually found from those who don't want the sex industry as we know it, the free reign of access to this content. They don't want that to come to an end. So that's usually where the fight is coming from. So just wanted to call all of you to join us in this effort to end, repeal, and ultimately sunset Section 230. One of the things that we like to say, and I know it's a little bit cheesy, but I still like to say it helps me remember, next year, 230 is going to turn 30 years old. And so we keep saying internally, don't let 230 get to 30. Like we got to end it before it gets to 30 years old. So I wanted to share that with you. There's so much more we could dive into, but Alan, I think I'll throw it back to you if you want to open it up for any other discussion or questions. Happy to dive into any of these other topics.
Okay, well, hey, thank you very much. Yeah, there are some topics. I have a question too, but before that, actually, there was a couple comments about Pornhub.
Yeah.
Why was that not on the list? And what's being done to tackle that big one?
Great question. One of the reasons we don't start to list the pornography companies is because number one, there's too many. They would be the entire list, and you can't even include all of them. So we are mainly going after mainstream facilitators that we aren't calling to boycott. We're calling for them to make a change. So it's a safe place for us and our kids and our culture to use that platform. There were maybe a few examples in the past where it was a little bit of, we want this platform to go away. So that has happened. For the most part, we aren't necessarily trying to boycott or end most of these companies that you see on the list. We want them to, like Apple, we're not so silly to think we should boycott Apple and that company should go bankrupt. No, we're not trying that. That's silly, but also it's not effective. We want Apple to create a safe place to be the most popular provider for phones and so that's why Pornhub would not be on the list. Absolutely, they're one of the worst. But I'll tell you what, Pornhub has had such a target on its back the last few years, ever since that Nicholas Kristof piece in the New York Times came out in 2022, which if you haven't read it, go read it. The Children of Pornhub. It's incredible and it's so insightful and heartbreaking. Ever since that happened and they started to come under fire and they even changed their parent company was called MindGeek. They changed their name now to ALO and there's a lot of maneuvering happening. They removed, I think it was like 80 to 90% of their content on their website just disappeared. It's almost as if they knew what they were hosting on their website. So Pornhub has been kind of forced into a corner on this. It's the other websites that are either lesser known or maybe under the radar, maybe based around the world in other locations that have less obligation to follow our laws or listen to us. So that is where we're doing a lot of fighting in legislative efforts, both at state and federal level for age verification, for example. Make it so when you get online and you go to access pornographic content, you can't just click a button that says, yes, I'm 18. What 15-year-old boy who's determined to see that content won't click, yes, I'm 18? They all will. So let's implement real technology-based, because it's possible, age verification. It still can be anonymous for those who are worried about protecting their privacy and things like that. There's ways to verify age. So we're pushing for that type of legislation, honestly, at the federal level, but there are some states that we've been excited to see pass that legislation as well.
Okay, great. I know on your website you use the phrase here, harnessing the power of data to provide evidence-based solutions, creating a world free of sexual exploitation, hopefully. So can you want to explain that phrase? What do you mean by harnessing the power of data?
Yeah, so one of the things that I have found is that when I'm in a conversation with someone over coffee about these issues, and we already share a lot of values, it's really easy to get us to shake our heads, both agree loudly, high five, and say, let's go do it. But when we're talking to people across the country, let alone around the world, with very different value sets coming from different experiences, different backgrounds, much harder to get unity around these issues until you can start to use data, research, science to back up. Here's what's happening to the brain. Here's what's happening to these children. Here's what's happening. Here's the percentage of, for example, a study of mainstream pornographic websites only 7 years ago showed that 1 in 8 videos shown to new visitors to these sites constituted sexual violence. And I don't mean like something a little bit inappropriate. It's all inappropriate. I mean actual violence that would have constituted something that's illegal. So 1 in 8 of these videos shown. And so as you start to show people data with these studies, you start to get some eyebrows to go up and you start to get people to lean in and pay attention a little more. Because right now it's easy to lean back and say, well, it's just adults having adult fun, let them do their thing. And that's not what we're talking about. It's very, very different from that. That's not the reality of it. And that's usually people who want to have blinders on and not address it because it's a hard topic. It really is. Even saying the word pornography can get a lot of people to want to tune you out because it can be awkward and uncomfortable. But it's so important because I promise you our kids are talking about it and they're seeing it. So we have to have the conversation.
Yeah, there's a question here too from about age verification for minors. I guess Australia has recently enacted a law. What are your thoughts about that happening in the United States?
Yeah, it's actually already happening in several states. I think we're up to 20
states now. Oh, I heard 20. Is there more?
It's over 20. I know that. It's very exciting. We're seeing age verification pass from state to state, and it's necessary, it's needed. And by the way, we have the technology to do it. We really do. Like we're so quick to give all of our info to Amazon and Google and everywhere else, and yet we act as if we can't give it to an age verification platform or tool. And there are so many that are very secure that these sites can use, but it costs them money, and it costs people an extra effort to do it. And so yeah, that's the main resistance is the money lost because they're losing visitors because of that requirement.
Patrick, would you like to
Well,
weigh in here on anything?
I think right now there's a lawsuit by a number of parents whose children
Yes.
were able to go around the age verification. So in those 20 something states that have age verification,
That's right.
the kids were still finding a way to get in. And so now there's a lawsuit against those porn sites.
That's right. That's actually in Kansas, Patrick, and that's from a partner firm as well as our law center here at Nicosi filed that. I think it was just a week ago. So thank you for bringing that one up. That's a child in Kansas was able to find an old laptop that a parent had stored away in a closet, just kind of put it away as an old, like, who cares about this laptop? I don't use it anymore, but I'll keep it in case I need it. Kid found it, connected it to the internet. It had parental protections on it, but not enough, not the right kind. And they were able to easily, without any verification, access horrific, violent, pornographic content. So, and that's what the lawsuit is really all about. It was, I think, 4 different websites being sued because it is the first of its kind lawsuit around this law. So very important.
Mhm.
It was a 14-year-old boy, I think, in the
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, yeah. What about this recent legislation that passed, the Take It Down Act? What's that about? You want to share with us? That's a good story.
It is, and we're always happy to celebrate policy victories because sometimes it can feel like time just stands still and nothing moves. So to see something, especially in this day and age, to see something get bipartisan support, nearly unanimous vote through in both the Senate and the House, and then signed by the president is just phenomenal, especially when it's something that addresses such a major issue. So the Take It Down Act was just signed into law this week, actually just yesterday. So what it does is it makes publishing or distributing non-consensual sexually explicit material, including AI generated, which we can talk about that if you're interested in talking about AI generated material. But this includes that type of material. It makes it a federal crime for publishing or distributing it if it's non-consensual, and it requires these platforms and any websites that host this kind of content where it's user generated. They're required to remove these images or videos within 48 hours once a survivor reports them. So that puts the pressure back on these platforms who have been able to so far throw their hands back and say, sorry, don't have to do anything. Now they do. So that's an exciting step forward in this space.
Do you want to mention anything about AI? Or Patrick, go ahead, Patrick.
Well, I wanted to say something about Roblox because, as I tutor, kids, and everybody's on Roblox. Like all these kids, it's like, if you were a parent and you wanted a nice, safe game for your kids to play, that's where you would put them. And it just recently in California, we had a 10-year-old girl was met by a 27-year-old guy. They would play games together. She mentioned that she was having trouble with her parents. He drove, I think, 3 hours down to pick her up and took her to Sacramento, where he was arrested with her
Right.
some days later. But you have a 10-year-old who's engaging in a conversation with a 27-year-old who pretends to be her friend. I mean, so some of these sites, you really got to be careful, even with sites that seem harmless. I mean, Roblox is unicorns and playing with pets, and it just seems like such a safe place to park your kids in front of, but it's really not. And also the migration over to Discord, which a lot of the kids start to talk to someone, they think it's another 12-year-old. It's actually a 50-year-old dude in Texas. And then he says, well, let's go to Discord and we can talk there. And the kid will do it because they think they're talking to a 12-year-old. And then they end up having a conversation about body parts, and that leads from one thing to the next and really puts kids in danger.
And by the way, Patrick, thank you for sharing that. It's so accurate and so true. And they're not, these people are smart. These predators, these bad actors, they know what appeals to our kids. And it won't be, hey, let's go talk somewhere private. Most kids will flag that and be like, well, that's weird. It could be, I really wanted to share, it won't let me share this with you. Let's go to Discord. It'll let me share it over there. It could be a video or a funny picture or whatever. Or I want to give you Roblox bucks or whatever the currency is there. And so, but it won't let me do it here. Let me share it with you on Discord. What's your Discord name? And so that's usually how they get them into less monitored environments.
Hmm. Hey, there's a question here is asking if you could give 2 names of known influential people in government that are championing what you are speaking of. So who are the champions that we can follow and support?
Like politicians.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah.
Or other influential people, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen on both sides of the aisle great support for a good example is the recent Take It Down Act. You've got Senator Klobuchar, Senator Cruz that were both, leads on that. We've seen it with COSA, with Senators Blackburn and Blumenthal that are both endorsing that and trying to push that through. So anytime we see bipartisan support, we know that might have the momentum that's needed to make something happen with this. And so those are just a couple of names that come to mind initially for me. A representative out of South Carolina who I want to give a shout out to, and if you don't follow him, go follow him, is Brandon Guffey. He's got an
Yeah.
incredible story. Patrick, you're familiar with his story, I'm
Yeah, I've
sure.
talked to him. Yeah.
Yeah, he's an incredible guy and has an incredible story. He's doing great work for his constituents, and he's been a major voice in this space as well.
Very
Okay.
important to learn about sextortion because we have just a number of boys who've committed suicide. I mean, some it's as quick as 30 minutes. I think his son, it was within a couple of hours of meeting someone online and then being sextorted and then reaching the conclusion that the only way for me to own this is to kill myself. I mean, it's just really, really tragic. But he's a great, great person to connect with.
Mhm. Uh, Before we go to your final comments, I'll see if there's any other questions, but so Section 230, is that something that might be taken up this year? Is just an ongoing battle, or where do we stand with that?
It is an ongoing battle. Last year we did hear, um, oh shoot, I'm totally blanking out on the representative's name. I'm going to look it up, but it was brought up the idea of sunsetting 230, and there's been multiple representatives who have spoken out on this. Kathy McMorris Rogers, Senator Dick Durbin, Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator Whitehouse, several representatives and senators have acknowledged 230 is the problem, and it needs to go in some way, shape, or form. So. I do believe there is the fact that it's even been brought up tells me a lot. And so I think there's hope, but it will be a bit of a fight to get it to happen. As you know, it's hard to get to the nitty-gritty of what is or isn't included in a sunset version of the bill or whatever would happen. Yeah, it's going to be a fight for sure.
Here's a question now. The Justice Defense Fund has taken the approach of focusing on the lack of consent from uploaders of porn and have forced financial companies to prevent the processing of payments,
Right.
thus straining the revenue of the companies. Seemed like that would be a good approach to cut off, funds.
That's right. I love the work that they do. Lila McAway is a hero. She's absolutely amazing. And so we joined in that effort with dismantling Pornhub. That was a few years back where we helped push that, and that's absolutely an effective way. As soon as they feel it in their pocketbooks, you start to get their attention. Absolutely. So I love that, and I do want to give them a shout out. Justice Defense Fund. Thank you for putting the link in there, Roger. Yeah, fantastic group and good work that they're doing.
Well, great, fantastic. So what we've been talking about is the cutting down the demand side with just returning some to our moral foundations essentially and really strengthening families. I know on your website, Patrick, it says it was a quote from um, someone who'd been in prison for years saying, if he
Jack
would
Reynolds.
never, you want to tell that story, he would never would approach somebody, right?
Yeah. Jack Reynolds he molested over 300 children and he was put in prison for 13 years. And when he got out of prison, he was interviewed and they asked him, well, what kind of children did you target? And he said, it wasn't a specific kind of child I targeted, but if I found that the father was involved in the kid's life, I left him alone. But he also said if it was a single mother, he would become the mother's hero. And so then she would willingly let him have access to her child. Yeah, terrifying like that. But really, really great point. Like when the father's involved, it does dampen the enthusiasm to mess with a child.
Okay, yeah. Reduce the demand, and then Tim, cut down and shrink the production of this stuff. Anyway, any final comments you have, Tim, and then Patrick?
Yeah, so I would say as parents, grandparents, or just concerned citizens in this space, I think when it comes to technology, we don't need to say no and just avoid and hide from new emerging technology. It's easy to do that and just say, I don't want to deal with it. But AI, for example, it's an exciting, powerful new technology that has a lot of potential to make life better. More than just convenience, it could really improve a lot of areas of our lives. Absolutely. And it could even be used in our areas of fighting sexual exploitation. But I will say that as it is right now, there's not enough holding it and its users more accurately accountable for how it's being used, how it's being weaponized, and how it's being used to create computer-generated image-based sexual abuse, or IBSA, as we say. So I think AI is a space where we can't hide. We can't just stick our heads in the sand and pretend it's not there. We need to learn about it. We need to figure out ways to use it and proactively use it in positive ways, and then make efforts for our legislators to make laws around how it can't be used. And it is kind of Wild West right now. So that is one thing I would say is not letting ourselves hide from this technology. And just as a quick data point to back that up, Thorn, if you're familiar with Thorn, a great organization, they released their report this year that showed that 1 in 8 young people, they personally know someone who was under the age of 18 when they were the target of AI-generated IBSA, or image-based sexual abuse. 1 in 8, so 12% of our young people already know someone as young as AI is and AI generated content is, they already know someone whose image was used using that technology. So we need to be aware of it, and we're going to need to be in that fight as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Patrick?
That was another thing, that the percentage of young people who feel that there's nothing wrong with sending a nude image of themselves to a complete stranger is really shocking. And just the speed with which a child would do that today. The thing for me is that, yeah, technology is not something to be feared, but the problem is we're really not able to handle it. Adults can't handle the technology that we currently have developed, and yet we're handing it to 8-year-olds. So it's like, how do we raise our children to be able to see this technology, with some sense? I'm always reminded of a quote by Dr. Meg Meeker, who's a pediatrician. She's written a number of books on fathers and parenting. But she has this one quote. She says, "Nothing that you say or do as parents is neutral." And I think we really need to keep that in mind. Your children they're gonna be assigning meaning to how they're treated and the experiences they have in your house. I had a girlfriend when I was a teenager, and every time our relationship got good, we would end up fighting. Years later, she was in therapy, and the therapist asked her, did your parents, what was a childhood memory? And she said, my parents would throw things at each other and hit each other. And then the therapist asked, did your mother and father love each other? And she said, yes. And it kind of all fell into place, that for her, love included fighting and throwing things at each other. So she could never have a decent relationship because that was imprinted in her. That was the meaning that she assigned to her parents fighting. And if we really kept that in mind as parents, the things that we do and say in front of our children, they're shaping their worldview around that. They're whether they feel that their relationships are nourishing and if they can trust you or not, that's going to impact their relationship to technology. If they can't trust you, then they're going to trust the person on YouTube that they meet, or the questions they ask on YouTube. So, I mean, really, if each of us really reflects on what kind of environment I'm creating for not just my own biological children. I mean, Tim, kudos to you. There are so many children who are not being loved at home, that are not receiving any kind of guidance. And especially as men, we need to step up and be that father figure for our communities and for those around us. So I would just leave it with that.
Yes. Yes. Great. Let's step up. That's for sure. Men, appreciate this, you guys. Tim and Patrick, thank you very much. I know we had a lot of good, interesting comments, and this will be posted on our website, us.upf.org, for future, replay and visitation. So thank you all. Have a great day, and thank everybody for joining us here on our Tuesday webinar with IAED.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you so much, everybody. This
Thank
was
you.
amazing content.
Fascinating, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah,
Mm.
very important.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Great program, Alan.
Brave men. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so necessary.
Thank you, Daryl, for joining us.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good job, Alan.
Mhm.
Mm.